The cold bit through her thin jacket as she huddled against the brick wall, trying to escape the sharp winter wind that whistled through the city streets. Leah pulled her knees closer to her chest, watching people hurry by with their coffee cups and busy lives, none of them sparing her more than a fleeting glance. 3 days without a proper meal had left her lightheaded. The small cardboard sign at her feet read, "Anything helps," in shaky letters, but the few coins tossed her way barely added up to enough for a convenience store sandwich. She'd been on the streets for nearly 2 months now, ever since she'd escaped the foster home where Mr. Dawkins's wandering hands and late-night visits had become too much to bear. Leah was 17, though most guessed she was younger. Her slight frame and large brown eyes gave her a fragile appearance that sometimes worked in her favor when people felt charitable. Today wasn't one of those days. "Move along, kid," a store owner called out, waving a broom threateningly in her direction. "You're scaring away my customers." She gathered her few possessions, a worn backpack containing a change of clothes, a toothbrush, a dog-eared paperback, and her most precious possession, a faded photograph of her mother seated at a grand piano, smiling at the camera with the same brown eyes Leah saw in her reflection. She had been 5 when her mother's battle with mental illness and addiction had torn their family apart, leaving Leah to bounce between relatives who didn't want her and foster homes that saw her as nothing more than a monthly check. The skies darkened as evening approached, promising rain. Leah walked aimlessly, her stomach cramping with hunger. The downtown area was busier, filled with restaurants and cafes where warmth and food tantalized from behind glass windows. She stopped outside one small establishment, peering through the window at the cozy interior. Unlike the upscale places nearby, this cafe had a worn, lived-in feel, mismatched chairs, bookcases lining one wall, and in the corner, something that made her heart skip, an old upright piano. Music had been her escape for as long as she could remember. When things got bad in the foster homes, she would sneak away to the public library, using their computers to watch piano tutorials on YouTube. She'd practice silently on tables, memorizing finger positions, and whenever possible, she'd slip into music stores to play on the display pianos until she was inevitably asked to leave. Despite everything, she'd somehow managed to teach herself to play, holding on to this connection to her mother like a lifeline. Rain began to fall in fat, cold drops. Making a split-second decision, Leah pushed open the cafe door, welcomed by a rush of warm air scented with coffee and baking bread. A few patrons sat at tables engaged in quiet conversation or staring at laptop screens. The man behind the counter, stocky with salt and pepper hair tied back in a short ponytail, looked up as the bell above the door jingled. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in her appearance. The worn shoes, the jacket too thin for the season, the backpack clutched protectively against her chest. Leah recognized that look. It was the same one she got from shop owners just before they told her to leave. "Bathrooms for paying customers only," he said gruffly, turning back to the coffee machine he'd been cleaning. "I'm not," Leah began, then paused. Her gaze drifted to the piano. It wasn't anything special. Scratched wood showing years of use, slightly yellowed keys, but to her it looked like salvation. "Actually, I was wondering." The man glanced up, one eyebrow raised. "Can I play?" Leah asked, nodding toward the piano. When his expression didn't change, she added quickly, "For food? I can play piano. If you let me play for a while, maybe I could get something to eat." A woman sitting at a nearby table snickered. "Ray, I think the street performers are getting younger," she called to the cafe owner. Another patron, a businessman with a laptop, looked up. "Probably can't even play chopsticksing," he muttered just loud enough to be heard. Heat rushed to Leah's cheeks. She was used to being invisible or unwanted, but mockery still stung. The cafe owner, Ray, apparently studied her for a long moment. His expression wasn't unkind, just wary and a little tired. "Look, kid, that piano's not just for show. Old Mrs. Chen used to play it before she moved to Florida. It's special to our regulars. I won't damage it," Leah promised, her voice small but determined. "I know how to play, really." Ray sighed, wiping his hands on a towel. "What's your name?" "Leah." "Well, Leah, I can't have people thinking they can just walk in and get free food for banging on a piano." He hesitated, then seemed to relent slightly. "But it's a slow night, and that thing hasn't been played in months." He nodded toward the piano. "One song. You play one decent song, I'll give you a sandwich and some soup. Deal? It was more than fair. Leah nodded eagerly, moving toward the piano before he could change his mind. She set her backpack carefully on the floor beside the bench and sat down, suddenly aware of how dirty her hands were. She wiped them nervously on her jeans. The businessman had turned in his seat to watch, an amused smile playing on his lips. A couple at another table exchanged glances. They were all expecting her to fail, waiting for the entertainment of watching this homeless girl embarrass herself. Leah took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The piano was out of tune, but not terribly so. She pressed one key, then another, getting a feel for the instrument. It had been nearly 3 weeks since she'd last played, when she'd slipped into a music store before being asked to leave. She closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out the cafe and the expectant faces. In her mind, she saw her mother's hands moving gracefully across keys, remembered the melody that had often drifted through their small apartment. It was the first piece she'd taught herself, determined to hold on to this part of her mother. Leah began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune. The opening notes were soft, hesitant, not from lack of skill but from the emotion welling up inside her. As she continued, her confidence grew. Her fingers remembered what to do, muscle memory taking over as the hauntingly beautiful melody filled the cafe. The snickering stopped. The businessman's smirk faded. Even Ray paused in his work, coffee pot suspended midair. Leah didn't notice any of this. She was lost in the music, in memories of her mother, in the pure relief of playing again after so long. The piece built gradually, her thin fingers finding strength as they danced across the keys, drawing out the delicate emotions of the music. When she reached the crescendo, pouring everything she had into the moment where the piece bloomed into its full beauty, a coffee cup clinked as someone set it down too hard, startled by the intensity. As the final notes faded, Leah opened her eyes, suddenly self-conscious. The cafe was completely silent. She glanced nervously at Ray, afraid she'd somehow broken the rules of their agreement. The businessman was staring at her, coffee forgotten. The couple had turned fully in their seats. The woman who had snickered earlier had a hand pressed to her mouth. "Where?" Ray finally said, breaking the silence. "Did you learn to play like that?" Leah shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Taught myself, mostly." "That's not possible," the businessman said flatly. "That's Debussy. People study for years to play like that." "Maybe I did," Leah replied quietly. "Just not in a classroom." Ray set down the coffee pot and disappeared into the kitchen. Leah's heart sank. Maybe he was going to call someone to remove her after all. She began to reach for her backpack, ready to make a quick exit. But Ray returned carrying a steaming bowl of soup and a thick sandwich on a plate. He set them on the nearest table to the piano. "Eat," he said simply. Leah hesitated, unsure if this was a trick. "I only played one song." Ray's weathered face softened slightly. "That was worth more than soup and a sandwich, kid. But it's all I've got ready right now." He gestured to the piano. "You can play more after you eat if you want. Something tells me the customers wouldn't mind." The businessman closed his laptop. "I'd stay for another coffee if there's going to be more music." The woman who had laughed earlier caught Leah's eye. "I'm sorry about before," she said quietly. That was really beautiful." Leah's stomach growled loudly, making her decision for her. She moved to the table and began to eat, trying not to wolf down the food too quickly despite her hunger. The soup was homemade, rich with vegetables and warmth that spread through her cold body. As she ate, she noticed Ray watching her with a thoughtful expression. He didn't look at her with pity or disgust, the two expressions she'd grown most accustomed to. Instead, there was curiosity and something else, a recognition, perhaps, of something familiar. "You can stay until closing," he said finally. "Play as much as you like. We'll figure out the rest later." Leah didn't know what the rest meant, but for the first time in weeks she felt a tiny spark of hope. She had food in her stomach, a warm place to sit, and a piano at her fingertips. For tonight, at least, that was enough. Outside, the rain fell harder. But inside the small cafe, something unexpected had begun. All because a desperate girl had gathered her courage to ask, "Can I play for food?" The next morning, Leah woke with a start, momentarily confused by her surroundings. She wasn't in her usual doorway or under the bridge. Instead, she lay on a narrow cot in a small storage room that smelled of coffee beans and flour. The events of the previous night came flooding back. The piano, the stunned faces, Ray's unexpected kindness. After closing time, when she'd played for nearly 3 hours straight, Ray had shown her this tiny room at the back of the cafe. "It's not much," he'd told her gruffly, "but it's dry and there's a lock on the door. You can stay tonight and we'll figure something out tomorrow." Leah sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Sunlight streamed through a small, high window, casting a warm rectangle on the concrete floor. Her backpack sat where she'd left it, untouched. For the first time in weeks, she hadn't slept with one eye open, terrified someone would steal her few possessions. A knock on the door made her jump. "You awake in there?" Ray's voice called. "Yes," she answered, quickly smoothing down her tangled hair. "I'm up. Kitchen opens in 20 minutes. Bathroom's through the hall if you want to wash up. Left you a clean towel." Leah heard his footsteps retreating. She grabbed her backpack and slipped out, finding the small employee bathroom where, true to his word, a clean towel hung on a hook. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, cheeks hollowed from too many missed meals, hair desperately needing a wash. But beneath the grime and exhaustion, there was something new in her expression, a glimmer of something that looked almost like hope. 20 minutes later, feeling remarkably better after washing her face and hands, Leah emerged into the kitchen. Ray stood at a large stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. He nodded toward a small table in the corner. "Sit. Eat. Then we talk." He set a plate in front of her. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, even a few strips of bacon. Leah's mouth watered at the sight. She wanted to devour everything in seconds, but forced herself to eat slowly, savoring each bite. It had been so long since she'd had a proper breakfast. "Thank you," she said between mouthfuls, "for everything. For last night, for letting me stay, for this." Ray grunted in acknowledgement, continuing his preparations for the cafe's opening. He wasn't much of a talker, Leah was learning, but his actions spoke volumes. When she finished eating, she carried her plate to the sink and began washing it. "Leave it," Ray said. "Dishwasher's for that." "I don't mind," Leah replied. "I want to help." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "How old are you, anyway?" "Really, 17. I'll be 18 in 5 months. Shouldn't you be in school?" Leah's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Probably. You running from something?" "Someone?" She didn't answer immediately, focusing on rinsing the plate. "Not anymore," she finally said. "Just didn't have anywhere to go." Ray didn't press further. Instead, he wiped his hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. "Here's the deal. I need help around here. Morning rush gets busy. Dishes pile up, tables need clearing. Previous helper quit 2 weeks ago to go to college." He paused. "Storage room's not much, but it's yours if you want it. Food, small pay under the table until you get proper ID sorted, and..." He nodded toward the front of the cafe. "Piano's not doing anyone any good sitting quiet all day." Leah stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You're offering me a job? And a place to stay? More like an arrangement. You help out, play some music for the customers. They loved it last night, best tips I've seen in months. And you've got a roof. It's temporary," he added quickly, as if worried she might think this was charity, "just until you figure out your next steps." Tears pricked at Leah's eyes, but she blinked them away. She'd learned long ago that crying never helped anything. "I'd like that," she said simply. "I'd like that a lot." "Good. Now finish those dishes. We open in 10 minutes. The morning rush at Ray's place was indeed busy. Leah learned quickly, clearing tables, washing dishes, refilling coffee cups. The work was physical and straightforward, a welcome distraction from the uncertainty that had dominated her life for so long. Some of the regulars gave her curious looks, but no one asked questions. In this small corner of the city, people seemed to mind their own business. Around 11, as the morning crowd thinned, the bell above the door jingled. Leah looked up from wiping a table to see the businessman from the night before. He scanned the cafe until his eyes landed on her. "You're still here," he said, sounding pleased. "I was hoping you would be." Leah nodded cautiously. Years in the foster system had taught her to be wary of friendly strangers, especially men who took special interest in her. The man must have sensed her unease. He kept his distance, gesturing to the piano. "Will you be playing again today?" Before Leah could answer, Ray emerged from the kitchen. "Thomas," he greeted the man. "Your usual?" "Please, the man," Thomas replied. He took a seat at a table near the piano, setting down a leather briefcase. Actually, Ray, I was just asking your new employee if she'd be playing again. Ray glanced at Leah. Lunch crowd starts showing up around noon. Might be nice to have some music then. He didn't make it a command, leaving the choice to her. Leah nodded. I'd like that. The next hour passed quickly as Leah continued her new duties. At noon, Ray nodded toward the piano. Go ahead. Half hour now. Maybe another half hour during the afternoon lull. She wiped her hands on her apron and took a seat at the bench. Unlike the previous night, when she'd been desperate and afraid, today she felt something close to peaceful as her fingers touched the keys. She began with something light, a Chopin waltz, playful and bright. The lunch crowd filtered in, many doing double takes at the sight of the slight girl at the piano filling the cafe with music. Thomas sat nursing his coffee, watching her with an expression Leah couldn't quite read. When she finished the waltz, transitioning smoothly into a gentle Beethoven piece, he approached the piano. Where did you learn to play like that? He asked during a brief pause between pieces. It was the same question Ray had asked the night before, but Thomas's tone held genuine curiosity rather than disbelief. Leah's fingers continued to move softly over the keys, playing quiet arpeggios. My mother played. Before she got sick. I was little, but I remember watching her hands. She hesitated, then added, after she was gone, I just taught myself. Libraries, YouTube tutorials when I could access computers, music stores until they'd ask me to leave. Thomas shook his head, amazement clear on his face. That's extraordinary. To reach this level with no formal training. Leah shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. It's just something I love. I teach music, Thomas said. At the conservatory uptown. Leah's hands faltered momentarily before she recovered, continuing the gentle melody. So that explained his interest. I've been teaching for 20 years, he continued, and I've rarely heard someone your age play with such natural expression. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. The conservatory has programs, scholarships for exceptional students. Leah's chest tightened. She'd had dreams once, impossible dreams of studying music for real, but years of disappointment had taught her that such opportunities weren't for girls like her. I don't even have a high school diploma, she said quietly. And no address, no ID, no way to apply for anything. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Those are practical problems with practical solutions. He pulled a business card from his pocket and set it on top of the piano. If you're interested, come by my office. We can discuss possibilities. Before Leah could respond, he returned to his table, gathered his things, and left with a wave to Ray. The business card sat on the piano, its embossed lettering catching the light. Thomas Chen, DMA, Professor of Piano Performance. For the rest of her afternoon shift, Leah's mind spun with conflicting emotions. Hope battled with hard-learned skepticism. Experience told her that when things seemed too good to be true, they usually were. But another part of her, a part she'd nearly forgotten existed, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was a real chance. That evening after the cafe closed, Ray found her sitting at the piano, not playing, just staring at the keys. You did good today, he said, pulling up a chair nearby. Customers liked the music. Tips were up again. Professor Chen said something about scholarships, Leah said, voicing the thought that had been circling in her mind all day. At the conservatory, Ray nodded. Thomas is good people. Known him for years. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean. I don't know if I could do it. Leah's voice was barely audible. It's been a long time since I was in any kind of school. And places like that. They're for people with money, with families who support them. Maybe, Ray acknowledged. But talent's talent. And you've got that in spades, kid. He stood, stretching his back with a slight wince. One step at a time. You've got a roof, food, work. Rest will sort itself out. As Leah settled into her cot that night, her mind replayed the day's events. For the first time in months, her growling stomach wasn't keeping her awake. For the first time in years, the future didn't look like an endless road of just trying to survive. She pulled out the worn photograph of her mother at the piano, the one precious item she'd managed to keep through everything. I played for people today, Mom, she whispered to the smiling face. They actually listened. Outside her small window, the city continued its nighttime rhythm. Traffic noise, distant sirens, the hum of millions of lives intersecting. But inside her tiny room, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Leah felt something like belonging. 2 weeks passed in a blur of routine that felt strangely comforting to Leah. Each morning she woke in her small room, helped Ray prepare for the day, and worked through the breakfast rush. At noon and again in the late afternoon, she played the piano for half-hour stretches, drawing growing crowds of customers who came specifically to hear the girl at Ray's. The storage room had transformed bit by bit. Ray had brought in a small dresser for her clothes, mostly second-hand items that his sister had delivered. After hearing about Leah, a tiny bookshelf held music books that Professor Chen had accidentally left behind during his now daily visits to the cafe. Leah still carried her backpack with her most precious possessions, but she found herself reaching for it less often, the constant fear of needing to run fading gradually. "You ever gonna call Thomas about that scholarship thing?" Ray asked one morning as they chopped vegetables side by side in the kitchen. Leah focused intently on dicing an onion. "I've been thinking about it." The truth was more complicated. She'd thought about little else, turning Professor Chen's business card over and over in her fingers each night. But something held her back, a deeply ingrained distrust born from years of disappointment and broken promises. "He asks about you every day," Ray continued. "Not pushing, just wondering." "I know." Leah scraped the onions into a waiting bowl. "It's just, people like him, they live in a different world. What happens when they realize I don't belong there?" Ray set down his knife and turned to face her. "Look, kid, I'm not one for speeches, but I've known Thomas for 15 years. Man's got no agenda except finding talented musicians. That's his whole deal." Leah nodded but remained silent. "Your choice," Ray said, returning to his chopping. "But sometimes chances don't come around twice." The lunch crowd that day was larger than usual. Word had spread about the piano performances, bringing in curious newcomers alongside the regulars. Leah felt their eyes on her as she cleared tables, a mixture of curiosity and anticipation that still made her uncomfortable. When noon arrived, she took her place at the piano, closing her eyes briefly to center herself. Music had always been her escape, the one place where the weight of her circumstances lifted. But now, with an audience watching expectantly, she felt the pressure of their attention. She began with Bach, the structured patterns familiar and soothing. As she played, the cafe grew quiet except for the occasional clink of cups or whispered conversation. By the time she transitioned into Schubert, she'd forgotten about the audience entirely, lost in the music as she always had been. A movement caught her eye midway through the piece, Professor Chen entering the cafe. He nodded a greeting but took a seat at the back, not approaching as he usually did. Something about his expression seemed different today, a focused intensity replacing his usual gentle encouragement. When Leah finished her set, the applause was enthusiastic. She nodded awkwardly in acknowledgement, still not used to this kind of attention, and headed back to work. Professor Chen remained in his seat, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. During the afternoon lull, while Leah wiped down tables, the bell above the door jingled. A woman entered, tall and elegant in a tailored suit, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. She surveyed the cafe with sharp eyes before spotting Professor Chen and joining him. Their conversation was too quiet for Leah to hear, but she noticed them glancing her way more than once. "That's Dean Wang," Ray murmured as he passed by with a coffee pot. "Runs the whole music department at the conservatory." Leah nearly dropped her rag. "Why is she here?" Ray just raised an eyebrow. "Take a guess." Fear and anticipation warred in Leah's chest. She busied herself behind the counter, trying to look absorbed in organizing coffee cups while keeping one eye on the pair. Eventually, Professor Chen approached the counter. "Leah," he said gently, "I hope you'll forgive me, but I've brought someone who'd like to meet you. Dr. Wang is the dean of our music department." The elegant woman joined them, extending a hand. "Professor Chen speaks very highly of your abilities, young lady." Leah wiped her palms nervously on her apron before shaking the offered hand. "Nice to meet you. Thomas tells me you're self-taught." Dr. Wang's tone was neutral, neither impressed nor dismissive. "That's quite unusual for someone playing at the level he describes." Leah's throat felt dry. "I had a good ear, I guess. And lots of time to practice. Would you play something for me? Something challenging. Perhaps some Liszt or Rachmaninoff if you know any." The cafe had emptied out during the afternoon lull, leaving only a couple of regulars nursing coffees in the corner. Still, Leah felt exposed as she reluctantly moved to the piano under the watchful eyes of Dr. Wong. She settled on the bench, her heart hammering. The most difficult piece she knew by heart was Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. She'd learned it by watching videos over and over, fascinated by its thunderous intensity and technical demands. Taking a deep breath, she began to play. The opening chords resonated through the cafe, dark and foreboding. As the piece progressed, growing more complex, Leah poured everything into it. All the fear and loneliness of the streets, all the uncertainty of her future. Her small frame seemed to grow larger as her hands stretched to reach the demanding intervals. Her slight shoulders hunched forward in concentration. When she reached the powerful middle section, where the bass thundered beneath cascading notes, she lost herself completely, forgetting Dr. Wong, forgetting the cafe, even forgetting her own doubts. There was only the music, raw, emotional, alive. The final chords faded into silence. Leah remained frozen for a moment, then slowly lowered her hands to her lap. She turned to find Dr. Wong standing perfectly still, her composed expression replaced by wide-eyed surprise. "Well," the dean said after a long pause, "that was not what I expected." Professor Chen smiled slightly. "I told you." Dr. Wong pulled up a chair near the piano. "Where did you learn that piece?" "YouTube," Leah admitted. "And I practiced in music stores until they kicked me out. Sometimes I could get into the practice rooms at the community center if no one was using them." Dr. Wong's eyebrows rose. "You learned Rachmaninoff from YouTube?" "I watched different pianists play it, compared techniques, tried to figure out what worked best for my hands." Leah looked down at her fingers, thin but strong from years of practicing however and wherever she could. "Your technique is unconventional," Dr. Wong said carefully, "but effective. And your interpretation—" She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Your interpretation has something many technically perfect players lack: authenticity, life experience." Professor Chen leaned against the piano. "That's what I've been saying, Helen. This is raw talent that deserves cultivation." Dr. Wong nodded slowly. "I agree, but there are practicalities to consider." She turned to Leah. "How old are you?" 17. "Almost 18. Education?" Leah hesitated. "I was in 10th grade when I left my last foster home." If Dr. Wong was surprised by this information, she didn't show it. "So you'd need a GED at minimum, and we'd need to address the guardian situation until you turn 18. She tapped her fingers thoughtfully on her knee. "There are obstacles, but not insurmountable ones." Leah's pulse quickened. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that the conservatory has a special scholarship fund for exceptional cases, students with extraordinary talent who don't fit the traditional applicant profile." Dr. Wong's expression softened slightly. It was established by a former student who himself came from difficult circumstances. He believed that music should be accessible to anyone with the passion and ability, regardless of background. Professor Chen smiled encouragingly. "It would cover tuition, dormitory housing, meals, everything." Leah's mind raced. It sounded impossible, too good to be true. The cynical part of her, the part that had learned hard lessons about false hopes, immediately looked for the catch. "What would I have to do?" "Audition formally," Dr. Wong replied. "Take placement tests to assess where you stand academically. Work with a counselor to develop a plan for completing your high school requirements while beginning music studies." She paused. "And you'd need to commit fully. This isn't something to approach half-heartedly." Ray, who had been silently observing from behind the counter, spoke up. "She'd need proper clothes for an audition." "Proper ID too." Dr. Wong nodded. "All solvable problems if she's interested." She fixed Leah with a direct gaze. "Are you interested?" The question hung in the air. Leah looked at Professor Chen's encouraging smile, at Ray's gruff but supportive expression, at Dr. Wong's composed but not unkind face. Then she looked at the piano, the instrument that had been her only constant companion through years of turbulence. "I'm scared," she admitted finally, the words barely audible. Dr. Wong's expression softened further. "That's entirely reasonable. Change is always frightening, especially significant change. What if I'm not good enough?" The question that had been haunting Leah spilled out. "What if I get there and everyone realizes I don't belong?" "That," Professor Chen said gently, is a fear every musician faces, regardless of background. I still feel it before performances, and I've been playing for 40 years. Ray moved from behind the counter and approached Leah. Kid, I've seen a lot of people come through those doors over the years. Most are just passing through. But some, he glanced at Professor Chen, some leave marks. You're one of those? He nodded toward the piano. That thing sat silent for months before you came. Now it's alive again. That means something. Leah looked down at her hands, calloused from work and practice, the nails cut short and practical. Hands that had kept her connected to music even when everything else was taken away. Okay, she said finally, looking up at Dr. Wong. I'd like to try. Something that might have been approval flickered across the dean's composed features. Good. Thomas will help coordinate the details. She stood, straightening her already impeccable suit. The winter auditions are in 3 weeks. That doesn't leave much time to prepare. Professor Chen nodded. I can work with Leah here after cafe hours. And she can keep staying in the back room, Ray added. At least until something better comes along. As Dr. Wong gathered her things to leave, she paused beside Leah. Your journey to this point has been unconventional, to say the least. But music isn't about convention, it's about expression, connection, communication. She offered a small but genuine smile. I look forward to hearing you play again, young lady. After the door closed behind her, Leah sat frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. The prospect of a real chance, a door opening to a world she'd only dreamed of, was almost too much to process. Well, Ray said practically, breaking the moment, guess we better get you some proper clothes and sort out that ID situation. Professor Chen smiled. One step at a time. First, let's talk about your audition pieces. And so, surrounded by the scent of coffee and the warm afternoon light filtering through the cafe windows, Leah began to plan for a future she'd never dared to imagine. A future where playing for food was just the beginning of her story, not the end. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Leah continued working at the cafe during the day, but her evenings were now dedicated to preparation. Professor Chen arrived every night after closing, turning the quiet cafe into an impromptu music studio. The old piano, which had seemed so magnificent to Leah that first desperate night, now revealed its limitations as she tackled increasingly complex pieces. The action is sluggish, Professor Chen noted during their third session, watching Leah struggle with a particularly fast passage. And it's at least a quarter tone flat in the upper register. It's still the best piano I've ever had regular access to, Leah replied, repeating the passage with adjusted fingering to compensate for the worn keys. The professor smiled. Soon you'll be practicing on concert grands. The conservatory has 26 Steinways. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Each step toward this new future came with excitement, but also waves of doubt. Who was she to think she could step into such a world? Ray had become unexpectedly invested in her preparation. He contacted his cousin who worked at the city clerk's office, starting the process of getting Leah proper identification. His sister Anna arrived one afternoon with armfuls of clothes, simple but appropriate options for the audition. You can't go in jeans and a t-shirt, Anna insisted when Leah protested the fuss. First impressions matter. It was strange having people care about these details of her life. For years, Leah had been invisible, another forgotten teenager in the system, then another nameless face on the streets. Now suddenly there were adults fussing over her clothes, her hair, her fingernails. You need to grow them a bit longer for better control, Professor Chen advised. And stop biting them when you're nervous. 1 week before the audition, a surprise visitor arrived at the cafe. A tall man with an expensive-looking camera entered during the afternoon lull, ordered coffee, and sat watching Leah as she played her now regular set. When she finished, he approached. That was beautiful, he said. I'm Pete Kelly from the Tribune. Mind if I ask you a few questions? Leah froze, looking instinctively toward Ray. Ray approached from behind the counter. What's this about? The man, Pete, smiled. Just a human interest story. Someone tipped us off about an exceptional young pianist playing for her supper in a neighborhood cafe. Thought our readers might appreciate it. I don't think, Leah began, but Professor Chen, who had just arrived for their evening session, interrupted. Actually, this might be good timing, he said thoughtfully. The conservatory's winter showcase is coming up. A bit of publicity beforehand could help attendance. Pete looked between them, clearly sensing a bigger story. Conservatory? Professor Chen briefly explained the upcoming audition, careful to keep the details of Leah's background vague. A remarkable young talent who's taken an unconventional path, was how he described her. After some discussion, and with Ray and Professor Chen both present, Leah reluctantly agreed to a short interview and a few photographs of her at the piano. She spoke carefully, sharing her love of music while avoiding the painful details of her past. "And how did you end up playing here?" Pete asked, his recorder running. Leah glanced at Ray. "I was having a rough time. Needed a meal. Ray let me play for food." She smiled slightly. "Best decision I ever made walking through that door." Pete seemed to sense there was more to the story but didn't press. He took several photos of Leah at the piano, her hands mid-motion over the keys, her face absorbed in the music. "The article should run this Sunday," he said as he packed up his equipment. "Good luck with the audition." After he left, Leah let out a long breath. "Was that really a good idea?" Professor Chen nodded. "The conservatory values publicity, and honestly, yours is exactly the kind of story that resonates with potential donors." "I don't want to be a charity case," Leah said, her voice hardening. "I don't want people feeling sorry for me." "It's not about pity," Professor Chen replied firmly. "It's about recognizing potential that might otherwise be lost. The scholarship you're applying for exists precisely because talented musicians come from all backgrounds, and talent shouldn't be wasted due to circumstance." The Sunday paper arrived at the cafe with Leah's story splashed across the local section. The headline read, "Piano Prodigy Plays for Meals Catches Eye of Conservatory." The photograph showed Leah at the piano, her face in profile, hands blurred with movement. She looked different, focused, almost graceful. Ray taped the article to the wall behind the counter. "Good for business," he said gruffly, but Leah caught the hint of pride in his voice. What none of them expected was how quickly the story would spread. By Monday afternoon, a local TV news crew had arrived, requesting a short segment. By Tuesday, the cafe was packed with curious customers hoping to hear the homeless piano girl for themselves. "I never said I was homeless in the interview," Leah muttered to Ray as she tried to navigate the crowded space with a tray of dirty dishes. "People fill in the blanks," Ray replied. "Makes a better story that way." The attention was overwhelming. Customers tried to take her picture while she worked or played. Some asked invasive questions about her past. Others left surprisingly large tips with notes of encouragement. "You're trending," Anna told her, showing Leah a phone screen filled with a video someone had secretly recorded of her playing Chopin the day before. It had thousands of views already. "This is insane," Leah said, closing her eyes. "I just wanted to play piano, not become some viral story." The day before her audition, the cafe door opened to reveal a face Leah had hoped never to see again. Mr. Dawkins, her last foster father, stood scanning the room, his thin face twisting into a smile when he spotted her behind the counter. "There you are," he said, approaching. "Been looking all over for you, girl." Leah froze, the coffee pot in her hand suddenly heavy. "What are you doing here?" "Saw you on the news," he replied, his voice carrying false concern. "Running away like that had us worried sick. The agency's been asking questions. It was a lie. No one had been looking for her. She'd made sure of that, choosing to live on the streets rather than report the real reason she'd left that house. If anyone had actually cared, they would have found her months ago." "I'm not going back," she said quietly, aware of customers turning to watch. Mr. Dawkins leaned closer. "Don't be stupid. You're still a minor. You belong in proper care." His voice dropped even lower. "Unless you want me to tell everyone why you really ran away. All those stories you made up." Ray appeared suddenly beside Leah. "Problem here?" Mr. Dawkins straightened, adopting a concerned expression. "Just trying to bring my foster daughter home. Been worried sick about her." Ray's eyes narrowed. "Funny, she never mentioned wanting to go home." He looked at Leah. "This the one you were running from?" Leah couldn't speak, but her expression must have told Ray everything he needed to know. His face hardened. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You can't keep a minor from her legal guardian," Mr. Dawkins insisted, his friendly mask slipping. "There'll be consequences." Professor Chen, who had been sitting at his usual table reviewing sheet music, joined them. "Actually, there's been a petition filed with family court regarding Leah's guardianship." This was news to Leah, who turned to him in surprise. Given the circumstances of her departure from your home, and considering she'll be 18 in a few months, the judge has indicated she's likely to approve temporary guardianship with another party until then. Mr. Dawkins's face reddened. What circumstances? The girl ran away. Made up stories. I have the case number if you'd like to discuss it with the court. Professor Chen continued calmly, pulling out his phone. And I believe the investigation into your foster home is ongoing. The color drained from Mr. Dawkins' face. Without another word, he turned and left, the bell jingling cheerfully in his wake. Leah stood trembling, the coffee pot still clutched in her hand. Is that true? About the petition? Professor Chen nodded. Dr. Wong started the paperwork last week. We were going to tell you after the audition to avoid adding more stress. He looked apologetic. The conservatory can't offer a scholarship to a minor without proper guardianship arrangements. Who? Leah began, then stopped when Ray cleared his throat. Anna volunteered, Ray said, suddenly very interested in wiping down the counter. She's got the spare room since her kid went to college. Said it made sense, you being nearby and all. He glanced up briefly. If that's okay with you. Leah set down the coffee pot before her shaking hands could drop it. The room felt suddenly too small, too full. Without a word, she walked quickly to the back door and stepped outside into the alley behind the cafe. The cold air hit her lungs, and she leaned against the brick wall, tears finally spilling over. They weren't entirely tears of fear or relief or gratitude, but some overwhelming mixture of all three. For so long she'd been alone, invisible, surviving day to day, and now suddenly there were people standing up for her, making plans that included her. Fighting for her. The back door opened and Ray stepped out, offering a clean dish towel in place of tissues. Sorry, Leah said, wiping her eyes. It was just too much in there. Ray nodded, understanding. Life changes fast sometimes. He leaned against the wall beside her. You don't have to decide anything now. About Anna, I mean. She just thought it might help with the scholarship thing. It's not that, Leah said. It's just... Why would she do that? She barely knows me. Ray was quiet for a moment. Some people just do the right thing when they see it needs doing. He looked up at the narrow strip of sky visible between buildings. Tomorrow's your audition. That's all you need to think about right now. Rest will sort itself out. As they stood in the quiet alley, Leah's phone, a prepaid model Anna had insisted on getting her, buzzed with a notification. Another video of her playing had been shared thousands of times, with comments pouring in from around the city. Looks like you've got fans, Ray observed, glancing at the screen. Leah shook her head in disbelief. All I did was ask to play for food. Sometimes, Ray said with a rare smile. That's all it takes. One brave question at the right moment. He opened the door back to the cafe. Now come on. You've got an audition to prepare for, and I've got a business to run. Taking a deep breath, Leah followed him back inside, where her new life, complicated, frightening, and full of unexpected possibilities, was waiting. The morning of the audition dawned clear and cold. Leah woke before her alarm, her stomach twisted in knots. She'd barely slept, running passages in her mind all night, imagining everything that could go wrong. What if she froze? What if her hands shook too much? What if the judges saw through her? Realized she didn't belong in their world of formal training and musical pedigrees. She dressed in the outfit Anna had helped her choose. A simple black skirt, white blouse, and a borrowed blue cardigan that brought out the warmth in her eyes. Her hair, freshly trimmed by Anna 2 days before, fell neatly to her shoulders. Looking in the small mirror propped on her dresser, Leah hardly recognized herself. Gone was the hollow-cheeked girl with tangled hair who had stumbled into Ray's cafe that desperate night. In her place stood someone who might actually have a future. The cafe was closed for the morning, Ray's rare concession to a special occasion. He, Anna, and Professor Chen were all accompanying her to the conservatory, an unexpected cheering squad that both touched and terrified Leah. What if she failed in front of them all? Eat, Ray commanded, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her. Can't play on an empty stomach. Leah tried, but each bite seemed to stick in her throat. Professor Chen noticed her struggle and sat across from her at the small kitchen table. Nerves are normal, he said quietly. Even the greatest pianists feel them. What if I mess up? The question that had haunted her for weeks finally escaped. What if this was all a mistake? Then you mess up, Professor Chen said simply. And you try again next time. He smiled at her confusion. Leah, this audition is important, yes. But it's not the only chance you'll ever have. Your talent didn't appear overnight, and it won't disappear if today doesn't go perfectly. Ray, overhearing as he wiped down the counter, added his own gruff wisdom. Kid, 3 weeks ago you were playing for sandwiches. Today you're auditioning at the conservatory. Whatever happens, you're already winning. The ride to the conservatory was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts. As Professor Chen's car approached the imposing brick buildings of the campus, Leah's breath caught. She'd seen pictures online but hadn't fully prepared herself for the reality. The manicured lawns, the students carrying instrument cases, the sense of belonging to a world of music and learning that had seemed impossibly distant just a month ago. Professor Chen led them to the main music building, its entryway adorned with banners announcing the winter showcase and auditions. Inside, the halls were filled with nervous students clutching sheet music and instrument cases, some practicing silently with fingers tapping invisible keys, others pacing or sitting in quiet meditation. This way, Professor Chen directed, leading them to a smaller waiting area. The scholarship auditions are separate from the regular program auditions. A young woman at a desk checked Leah's name against a list. You'll be in Studio C. Warm-up room is down the hall. You have 20 minutes before your slot. The warm-up room contained an upright piano, nicer than any Leah had ever played. She ran her fingers over the keys, relieved to find the action responsive and the tuning perfect. Ray and Anna waited outside, but Professor Chen stayed with her, offering quiet encouragement as she warmed up with scales and portions of her prepared pieces. Remember, he said, as an attendant appeared to escort her to the audition room, play from your heart. That's what makes your music special. Studio C was larger than Leah had imagined, with high ceilings and sound-absorbing panels along the walls. In the center stood a magnificent grand piano, its polished surface gleaming under the careful lighting. Across the room sat a panel of 5 people, including Dr. Wang, behind a long table. Leah Tran, Dr. Wang announced as Leah entered, candidate for the Phillips Memorial Scholarship. Please introduce yourself and your program. Leah stepped forward, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain they must hear it. Good morning. I'm Leah Tran. I'll be playing Bach's Prelude in C minor from the Well-Tempered Clavier, followed by Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, and concluding with Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. An ambitious program, Professor Chen had warned her, but one that showcased both technical ability and emotional range. Leah moved to the piano, adjusting the bench carefully. As she placed her hands on the keys, she was startled by how different this instrument felt compared to the worn piano at Ray's, like trading in a bicycle for a sports car. She began with Bach, the intricate patterns flowing from her fingers. The acoustic quality of the room amplified every note, surrounding her with sound in a way she'd never experienced. Halfway through the piece, she forgot about the judges, forgot about the scholarship, forgot about everything except the music itself. This was why she had survived everything, for moments like this, when nothing existed but the conversation between her soul and the piano. The Bach concluded, and without pause, Leah transitioned into the Chopin. This piece had always spoken to her deeply, its moments of tender beauty interrupted by passages of almost violent intensity. Like life itself, as she played, images flashed through her mind. Her mother at the piano, the years of loneliness, the cold streets, Ray's cafe on that first desperate night. All of it poured through her fingers into the music. By the time she reached the Rachmaninoff, Leah was no longer playing for the judges but for herself, for the girl who had refused to let her circumstances destroy her love of music. The powerful chords resonated through the room, building to the thunderous climax that had so impressed Dr. Wang in the cafe. Here on this magnificent instrument, the piece sounded even more dramatic, more alive. The final notes faded into silence. Leah's hands rested on the keys as she caught her breath, slowly returning to awareness of where she was and what was at stake. Thank you, Ms. Tran, Dr. Wang said, her voice revealing nothing. The panel may have a few questions. One of the judges, an older man with kind eyes, leaned forward. Your technique in the Rachmaninoff is unusual. Self-taught, I understand? Leah nodded. Yes, sir. I watched videos of different pianists and tried to adapt their approaches to what worked for my hands. Remarkable, he murmured. making a note. Another judge asked about her musical influences and background. Leah answered honestly but briefly, not dwelling on the hardships of her past. One final question, Dr. Wong said. Why music? With all the challenges you've faced, what made you hold on to this particular dream? Leah considered the question carefully. It wasn't really a choice, she finally said. Music was the one thing no one could take from me. Even when I had nothing, no home, no family, sometimes not even food, I could still hear the music in my head. I could still feel it in my fingers. She looked down at her hands, then back at the panel. It kept me human when the world tried to make me invisible. A silence followed her words. Dr. Wong's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Thank you, Miss Tran. You'll be notified of the committee's decision by the end of the day. The next hours passed in a blur. Ray insisted on treating everyone to lunch at a small restaurant near campus, though Leah could barely eat. They wandered the conservatory grounds afterward, Professor Chen pointing out different buildings and sharing stories about his own student days. Anna kept up a steady stream of cheerful conversation, clearly trying to distract Leah from her anxiety. Late afternoon found them back at the administrative building, where candidates were receiving their results. The hallway was filled with emotions, tears of joy, disappointed faces, excited phone calls to parents. Leah stood slightly apart, Ray and Anna flanking her like protective bookends. Dr. Wong emerged from an office, scanning the crowd until she spotted Leah. With a small gesture, she invited her into a private room. Ray squeezed Leah's shoulder before she followed the dean inside. Please sit, Dr. Wong said, indicating a chair across from her desk. She studied Leah for a moment before speaking. The committee was quite impressed with your performance today. Leah held her breath. There were 5 candidates for the Phillips Scholarship this winter. All were exceptionally qualified. Dr. Wong folded her hands on the desk, but none played with the raw emotional authenticity that you demonstrated. A small smile appeared on Dr. Wong's usually composed face. We would like to offer you the Phillips Memorial Scholarship, covering full tuition, room and board for 4 years, contingent upon maintaining academic progress and participating in the conservatory's performance requirements. The words took a moment to register. When they did, Leah felt tears spring to her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me, Dr. Wong replied. This was earned, not given. She slid a folder across the desk. These are the details of the scholarship, along with information about dormitory arrangements, meal plans, and the academic support services available to help you complete your GED while beginning your music studies. Leah stared at the folder, unable to quite believe it was real. There's one more thing, Dr. Wong continued. Your story has attracted considerable attention. The donor who funds this scholarship has expressed interest in having you perform at the Winter Showcase next month. It would be an opportunity to introduce yourself to the conservatory community and thank the donor in person. Of course, Leah managed. I'd be honored. When she emerged from the office, folder clutched to her chest, Ray took one look at her face and broke into a rare, full smile. Told you, was all he said, but his pride was evident. 1 month later, Leah stood backstage at the conservatory's main concert hall, waiting to make her debut. The Winter Showcase was the largest event of the season, attended by students, faculty, donors, and music lovers from throughout the city. Peering through the curtains, she spotted familiar faces in the audience, Ray and Anna in the 3rd row dressed in their Sunday best. Several regulars from the cafe had come to support her. Even Pete from the Tribune was there, camera ready. Professor Chen appeared at her side, now officially her instructor. Nervous? Leah nodded, smoothing down the simple black dress Anna had helped her choose for the occasion. Terrified. Good, he said with a smile. Use it. Remember why you're playing and who you're playing for. As the dean announced her name and the story of the remarkable young pianist who began her journey playing for food, Leah took a deep breath. She walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. The magnificent concert grand waited at center stage like an old friend. Sitting at the bench, adjusting it slightly, Leah looked out at the sea of faces. Then her eyes found Ray, the gruff cafe owner who had taken a chance on a desperate girl with a wild request. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. Leah placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Not Bach or Chopin or Rachmaninoff this time, but an original composition she had written for the occasion. It told her story through music, the loneliness, the struggle, the moments of beauty found in unlikely places, and finally the soaring hope of new beginnings. As the music filled the grand space, Leah knew she had found her way home, not to a place, but to a truth she had always carried within her. She wasn't just playing for food anymore. She was playing for her future, for those who had helped her, and for others who might still be waiting for their own chance to be heard.